Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Roy. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm all right. Looking forward to this one. This is our day one after the intro of these next four lessons, which really get down to the nitty gritty of the learning and change. And this is about the importance of being open and built on the human need to question.
Yeah, and what do you mean by open in this example? Do we mean open to change? Is that what we're talking
Yeah, I
about?
think it's open to change, open to learning, but open to seeing the world a little differently, and also open to the science. Because everything that we do in each of these programs is based upon science. In fact, three kinds of proof, really: theoretical proof, comparative research, and actual experience. And so the theory here we're going to look at is the learning brain, and the comparative research of this, which is vast. But more importantly, in all of these is how does it work for you? So I see the importance of making sure that we have research, but I'm more interested in it being more, as they say, ontological. Actually do it and get that experience. Because if someone's written a paper about something, that's interesting. But unless they've actually experienced it, it's still theory. So this is about encouraging the students to really take the ideas that we're going to discuss, but to use them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so Ruma Godden, she fantastic author. She wrote this in her biography. Everyone is a house with four rooms: a physical, a mental, an emotional, and a spiritual. And unless we go into every room every day, even to keep it aired, we're not a complete person. So this is really interesting because this links into, again, the neurology we're going to talk about, but also the psychology that we'll look at in the next section, because Jungian psychology in particular says these are four personality types. And what we're exploring is how are you bringing each of these aspects into your own skills as a learner and as a person.
Yeah, and the four rooms also link very, very closely with the four essential human needs as well, don't they?
Yes, they do. And I think the four human needs: the need to question, which is our spiritual intuitive, having that gut feeling. The need for forming relationships, which is the creative emotional. The need for practical, to practically change and learn to understand how to go through, change in chaotic situations. And the need to get results, the need to know how you got the results and to be able to repeat that. That's just an evolutionary, it's in our DNA to want to explore and to develop. So out of each of those four rooms, anything you want to say about the four rooms before we move on?
Let's go back to the quote a bit and should we go through each of those rooms and talk about why each one's important?
Yeah, what do you think as a teacher? Why do you think each of them are important? You take the lead on this one.
Well, okay, we'll go through them in order. If we start with the physical, I think sometimes that's one that's neglected, but looking after our physical health is one of the most important things for our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And if you don't look after yourself physically, and that could be drinking enough water, it could be eating good food, could be getting enough sleep, but it's also exercise. When we exercise, it releases endorphins in our body, which make us feel happy. So it affects directly the mental. And if you're happy, you're more likely to learn, and you will learn more. And there's also huge amounts of evidence that say that physical activity will literally make your brain work better.
Totally.
And also not forgetting sleep, which is when our memories are formed. So if we neglect sleep, then we're going to neglect the other ones. And there's also a huge amount of evidence which says that a lack of sleep can lead to worsening mental health.
Yeah, I mean, one of a key torture technique is sleep deprivation. And as we'll look at this later on in the session about the learning brain and the triune brain, the eat-sleep element of it is absolutely at its bedrock.
Absolutely, and as we go through the videos, we'll start to look at how we can manage our time to make sure that we get enough sleep.
Yeah.
And that brings us on to the mental aspect as well, which is making sure that we're learning and changing and evolving as we go through. That we're not stuck in the same mindset, and we're not we change our opinions as we get older and more mature, and that's really important for children and for adults. That some adults will stop learning the second they leave school, but it's really important that we all believe in lifelong learning.
Yeah, and the whole mental element of it, the mental health of both the students and staff is vital, because the mental here also means it's the analytical, it's the intellectual, it's understanding the depths and critical thinking. And I really want the students and the staff during this process, to ask questions, say, well, where does that come from? How does that work? Because we're not making this a didactic, you have to do it like this. Say, try this, but check it. Make sure they've got the research around this. Otherwise, it just becomes something that's done to you instead of something done, with you. That's really important.
And the emotional room is all about the quality of our relationships. It's, as we said before, it's one of these, having relationships of value is an essential human need. We really do struggle without it. Actually, there's a lot of evidence that loneliness or perceived loneliness can actually take years off your life expectancy.
It is, and that need to have relationships of value. And if you think about your own educational experience, who did you really learn from? Well, you learned from the teacher that made you feel good. It is. You learned from the teacher who you wanted to be in the room with. Now, you may not have liked them, but you either respected them, but they valued you. And this whole reciprocal value of who you are in relationship. If you're frightened by someone, if you're terrified of getting things wrong, that's not particularly good to enhance the state for learning. So yeah, you're right. The emotional relationship between pupil and pupil and teacher is an absolute. Again, when we start touching on the brain, an absolute necessity for effective, easy learning.
And the last one, spiritual. This is one that some people will think doesn't apply to them. Do you want to talk to us about the spiritual?
Yeah, the spiritual is not religious. I mean, it can be. I mean, some people interpret spiritual as religious, but within this context, it's your gut feeling, it's your intuitive intelligence. And again, we're focusing very much on the neuroscience in this session. Is the gut feeling? We have brain cells in our gut because of our subconscious, right in the hippocampus in our brain. All of our memories. When we see something, it releases chemicals to go. You need to be aware here. You really need to be aware.
Actually, biology scientists have discovered that there's something called the brain-gut axis.
That's right.
Which means that the gut is literally connected to the brain.
That's right.
And actually, we do make decisions because maybe eventually we'll come into this, but roughly somewhere between 80 and 90% of our decisions are actually made subconsciously.
That's right. So we can be picking up or walking somewhere and doing something, and then not really know why we're doing it. But this is a really important bit of science here, because we are driven by our subconscious more than we would like. And in our later sessions, we'll talk about the conscious and the unconscious mind. But if we can just be aware that the reality is we may be making decisions based upon what's known as an unconscious bias, where we're doing something unconsciously that we can then try and justify through logic. But actually, if we stop and take a step back, which is what the spiritual intelligence is encouraging us to stop and breathe and really slow the brain down, which is what we're going to do as a practical exercise in this session, then you give yourself access to more of your brain, to more of your thinking brain, and therefore you can make a decision that isn't just reactive and going, because not your gut feeling isn't always, it's not always saying you should act upon it. It may be saying you don't have enough information here to act, and that's important to recognise that.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. Let's go on to talk about the brain.
Okay, so in terms of this is about being open and again linked to the importance of questions, as we say, and in terms of the narrative around the mythology, this is a call to adventure. This is a call to adventure. So we have three brains. when I say three brains, the brain evolved in three distinct, according to P.D. McLean and others. We can see here this cross section of the brain, three very distinct sections. The safety or the brainstem, which is known as the reptilian brain, and this deals with our basic survival, eat, as you say, and as our sleep, and our basic needs for survival. And when we're under threat, we will go right back down to this, and our response from this stage isn't particularly compassionate, it isn't particularly insightful, but from a learning point of view, it has to be ignited. And this is where we need our passion and our purpose to say, well, why am I here? Is this going to actually help my survival? So if someone's in a lesson and they don't know how this is going to help them, it's going to be very difficult for them, for their brain to go, hang on, this isn't relevant. So as we say, we'll look at in the later sections on learning, the brain is saying, is this relevant to me? Is it interesting? Is it new, novel? And is it fun? And if it is, then we spark up to the next part of the brain, the limbic or the emotional brain, which again links into our relationships. And this evolved as we evolved in terms of started building communities and tribes and hunter-gatherers. And this part of our brain, this whole period in terms of our evolution was a very long period. We were quite happy with this level of brain. We were just pottering along, making, doing a bit of hunter-gathering, didn't have to plant anything, we just go and picked it off trees. And the hunter-gatherers were probably the most happiest period of humanity's existence, because they spent most of their time socializing and just being in community. But that then led to a point where they went, we could do more here. And that's where the neocortex, the learning brain, the higher order thinking comes into play. So when we learn and when we teach, we should go from bottom up. Is this purposeful? Am I engaged emotionally? Okay, let's get on with the thinking.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating order that we're using the brain. And when people go into have brain scans, and when they're doing certain activities, the different parts of the brain light up. So we know that this is the case and this is what's happening.
There are quite a lot of myths around the brain as well. Again, without making this too deep, have a look at the movie, and I'll put a clip onto the site of The Divided Brain, which it came out last year, and it's fascinating. The subtitle a subtitle for the film is the film that one half of your brain doesn't want you to see, because the left hemisphere, in the past people say, oh, your left is your logic and your right is your creative. That's not the case. The left hemisphere, from an evolutionary point of view, is about focusing on the stuff that you know, the detail, the things that you know that you know. So Ian McGilchrist, who's the expert on this, he said it's like you imagine a bird trying to pick for seeds amongst pebbles or little grit. He's focusing on that. He knows what he wants. Now the right hemisphere is about the possibilities, what could happen, which is like keeping an eye out so you don't become food, and looking out for friends and relationships. And so when we're in a time of crisis and challenge, most people will go, brainstem, I need more food. I'm going to still, get as much food as I can. I'm going to buy too many tins of soup and more toilet roll than I can actually use in a lifetime. And I'm going to focus on the importance of just getting this right now. Doing what Okay. So, but the right hemisphere is about the potential. So, in a time of crisis, you should go counterintuitive and go, okay, how can we resolve this? How can I solve this? So, when someone feels stressful about their learning, I can't do this. The role of the educator, the facilitator, is saying, you can't do it yet. You can't do it yet.
And yes, the power of yet is one of the most important things. But should we talk a bit about how this applies to students? Because what we're saying is that in the reptilian brain, the brain stem, that's where a lot of our stress originates. and it's the origin of some of the stress hormones that floods our body when we're in school, because schools can be really, really stressful for students.
They can, and the response, we have something in the brain called the amygdala. It means almond, Greek for almond, because it's shaped like an almond. And under stress, the amygdala, again, which is in the limbic part of the brain, it will pump out chemicals, and we'll want to do one of 4, possibly 5, but let's stick with the 4. Fight, flight, freeze, and flock. So from a learning point of view, from a student's point of view, for the students that are watching this, ask yourself, when you find yourself in a situation whereby you feel stuck in the lessons, is your automatic response to become confrontational? Okay, that is not you consciously thinking, that is back to what we were saying earlier, that is your unconscious response going, okay, I just need to protect myself here, I don't want to look like I'm stupid, and that's functioning at an emotional level, so we want to fight.
Yeah, so I do this thing where I will ask a question to the whole class and then randomly pick a name, and the reason I do it is because it means that I know that everyone's thinking about it. But for most students, that's incredibly stressful and they hate it. And it's because they're going into one of these 4S. Either when I do the random names, some students will say, no, I'm not going to answer the question, which is kind of a fight response.
That's right.
Some will totally avoid answering the question, so it's flight. Some will not be able to answer it, even though they know the answer, they can't do it.
Yeah.
Which is freeze. And then the flock would be one student says no, then the other student says no, and no one will answer it. So it's really, really interesting. These stress reactions play out every single day in schools, and it also, the stress can have really huge impacts on our ability to learn, because it impairs the function of the rest of the brain. So when we're stressed, we literally can't learn. Actually, it also leads to students making bad decisions. So when students that are normally very mild-mannered become stressed, they can often react in very unpredictable ways, which, especially if you're a teenager, it's often why teenagers get such a bad reputation for being grumpy. And interestingly, stress has been proven to have the same impact on your decision making as getting drunk. So it's something that we all need to be aware of and try and manage in ourselves, both teachers and students.
I think that you're right, and there's some wonderful literature out there. The Blame My Brain is a really good book to look at the teenage brain. The biggest challenge, again, this is all evolutionary science. Your prefrontal cortex kicks in through puberty, and your prefrontal cortex is your decision making. It's your rational. So that kind of goes into shutdown, and you get emotional. It's not a good recipe for, but when we actually have to ask ourselves from evolutionary science, why is it that evolution meant that when we get to the point of puberty and teenagers, we become basically a bit arsey and kind of have to challenge the adults around us? Well, the simple answer is you're preparing to leave the tribe. You're preparing to set up your own family. This is like really basic, that you have to move away from being the child and becoming that mature adult who can then go and set up a family of their own. And that is still a drive that, whilst we may not still have that, I mean, how many parents still have their children living at home, but it's still, we should be aware that the evolutionary signals here is when you get to a certain age, you will then move into, I need to find a way of finding my own path and my own way. And this is really important.
And on a day-to-day level as well, there is a very clear and simple strategy we can use to prevent the reptilian brain from functioning and to actually get the cortex to operate. So should we talk about that?
Yeah, I think we'll the point about actually just slowing down a little bit. I just want to make one final point. You're right in terms of the fight. The flight is like wanting to run away. The freeze is what happens when we're under stress. And a lot of our kids who are really good in the class, they know the knowledge, They can do the test in the class, but you put them into a school hall with all of the desks, which are relatively too small if you're over 5'6", and they're all 2 meters apart. It's an incredibly stressful environment. It's the worst environment to take a test. You should take a test in the place you did the learning. But we do this for efficiency. And when we start looking at the drives later on, it's like, well, hang on, are we creating an environment where we want to really get the best out of our kids? Or are we doing it just because that's the way we've already done it? And this is not so much about changing the mind of the children, it's about changing the mind of the systems. Because the final one is flocking. And flocking is when you turn to someone and say, I think it's rubbish, do you think it's rubbish? And teachers and children and students both respond to this under threat. You and I have been sort of developing the technology within school for months now. And technology for some teachers is, I don't do it. Well, why not? If it's our core purpose is about the education of children, that should be our core purpose. But our automatic response, unconscious response, as you said, is, well, I just don't do it. And now I'm going to justify why I don't do it. But actually, getting aggressive, not turning up to meetings, freezing when someone puts an iPad in your hand, or turning around to your mates and saying, this is all rubbish, isn't it? Is as much a response from teachers unwilling to engage in a change situation as it is for pupils. And the best adult that you can have in front of a young person is someone actively engaged in change, and they can see doesn't know everything. So how we manage that? In terms of transformation, what we're wanting the students to do is become independent learners. And that means that the stages of change is you need to focus on yourself. We're going to do an exercise now, as you say, just to sort of get them to calm their brains down. But the next stage is the relationship with others, and then the third stage is environment. And too often we want the environment to change, we want others to change, and then we'll change. But the reality is, if you want to change anything in the world, and this is a global citizens program, you have to be the person that does your human evolution. You then have to learn the skills of engagement with others, and then you can shift and change your environment.
Makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
So what we're going to do is we're going to make it simple, but no simpler, as Dr. Graves says, and we are using the learning line at its simplest, and every session we put in a little layer of complexity, but it's still down to know, do, be.
Yeah.
And so this is the process of learning that links to the brain. Get your passion and purpose sorted. That's your reptilian brain. Understand your relationship with others and agree a plan of action. That's your emotional. Act and evaluate it, which is you moving into your higher order thinking, and then embed it through repetition, again, which is your higher order thinking. Yeah. So one exercise that I'm going to suggest that you and I do, and I'll put it on here, this is called the breathe bubble. It's very simple, but just for 30 seconds. And if for those of you who are watching this at home, just join in with us as we do this. I'm going to just click this, and we're just going to sit and breathe. And as the bubble goes around, you breathe in, and as the bubble goes back, you breathe out. It's basically going to take.
Just remind us again why we're doing this. What's the power of focusing on the breath?
Well, the power of breath is from a purely physiological point of view, you're getting oxygen into your system. If you're stressed, you're breathing from the upper chest, and our lungs are pyramidal. So when we're stressed, we kind of we breathe into the chest. And if you imagine when you're a kid, or recently when you've got really upset, we take these what's known as snatch breaths, which means we're not getting oxygen into our system. And our brain isn't designed to learn. Our brain is designed to survive. And you start starving the neocortex of oxygen, it's going to go straight into the emotional and survival. So if you want to get your memory back, take a breath. And this is something that I would suggest practice every day. I do this every day. I do a form of this every day in terms of just breathing. And it's unfortunate that some people, it goes right back to our 4 rooms. Oh, this is a spiritual experience. No. This is sports science. You look at anyone doing sport and look at the rugby squad. They're doing this. They're sitting, they're breathing, and they're probably doing even deeper work in terms of visualization and all of that. But if you want to get your brain to work, you've got to get your breathing to work first.
Yeah, and there's a basketballer called LeBron James who's a huge believer in this. But there's examples all through sport. One of my heroes is a golfer called Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
And he spent a month with the US Navy SEALs on using breathing techniques to lower his heart rate down so he could make better decisions under pressure. And he's the best golfer that's ever lived. So that'll do for me. And just to really go back and summarize, what we're saying is that by focusing on the breath, you will feel calmer. Yeah. And when you feel calmer, you will not be stressed and you will be able to learn better.
Yeah. And then your fight, flight, freeze, flock response will be lessened, and then you can make a more conscious choice. So let's just see what happens here. So focus on the breathing in. And that's it. That's it. It's like 3 or 4 breaths. What's really interesting, and we'll look at this in the final sessions, is about how time shifts. I won't unpack that now because it's an interesting one. Because when we breathe, for someone who wants to just get on with it, based on their different personality types, that 30 seconds would have felt like an hour. But for those people who kind of just sit in it, that would have felt like a couple of seconds. But that's all relative to time.
Yeah. And worth pointing out that some people, when they try to do this, will actually feel very uncomfortable, and it will actually possibly even leave them short of breath. But it's worth reminding everyone that they were probably breathing with their chest before, and you really need to breathe with your stomach. That's when you get the proper effect of it. So persevere with it if you don't like it at the start.
That's a really good point. Thanks for emphasising that, Paul. When you breathe, you should be breathing right down to your, imagine you're breathing down to your belly button. But it's this muscle here, the diaphragm, which is the muscle that you're activating. If you look at babies when they breathe,
little babies as well, not through the mouth. If you're breathing through your mouth, and believe it or not, you're actually breathing wrong.
Yeah, because you're going to be bringing it onto the chest. So breathing in through the nose and then out through the mouth and relaxing the jaw. But if you look at newborn little babies, when they sleep, their little fat tummies are coming out. If you want to know how to breathe and stand, go and look at an infant. Because they're yet to get the stress, which comes as inevitability of being a human being on the planet. So, challenge to the students now is this week, every day, at least once, and I would recommend morning and evening, do the breathing. Just see how it feels. And in order to do that, moving from the knowing the theory to the actual doing, ask yourself what you need to keep about you. And it could be an intellectual, emotional, practical, spiritual. You may need to keep your determination. What do you need to develop? Develop the ability to sit down and breathe. Develop this technique. And again, you can speak to myself or speak to Paul via Teams, for those of you who are working with us on there. And we'll give some more tips. We'll add some more comments. But also let go of. And I think the main thing that all of us need to let go of when we do this exercise, of let go of the idea that you're being a bit of a hippie. You're being a sports person. You're being a military individual. And I think those are really good examples, Paul, to say, this is just something that people who are consciously aware of being the best they can before they go into a challenge, be it a military activity or a sporting activity or an educational activity, just have to do. Sit, find your seat, get your spine up, breathe in 3 times. So that's it for this session. Any thoughts you want to finish off with, Paul?
No, I think we've covered it all.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Next time we're going to be looking at, this is about being open, next time we're going to be looking at being kind and the importance of building relationships. And see you then.
Okay. Bye.